everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Parallel Barking. My name is Larry Backer, Woof Woof, and I'm here with my puppy.
Ariana Backer, Bark Bark.
And today I almost started by doing a replay of the cold open of Saturday Night Live of a couple of days ago uh, for what had got to be the most interesting 15 minutes of fame that three university presidents and a Republican House of Representative member from upstate New York will likely have for the next several years. I'm referring, of course, to the now notorious hearings that was held by the House of Representatives entitled Holding Campus Leaders Accountable and Confronting Antisemitism, to which Claudine Gay, the president of Harvard University, Elizabeth McGill, the president of the University of Pennsylvania, now resigned. And Pamela Nadell of American University, who was there as a faculty member to provide context, and Sally Kornbluth, the president of MIT, testifying the part of it which had caused a bit of a media stir and a fairly hysterical and quite naughty cold opening for Saturday Night Live was in the colloquy between the three university presidents and Professor Nadell from American and the representative of from upstate New York,
Elise Stefanik.
Elise Stefanik, and the
It was great because she repeated. I mean, it wasn't great. What it was it was heated because she repeatedly asked whether calling for the genocide of Jews would violate each university's code of conduct.
And the answer was varied and academic, but ultimately could be reduced to, well, it depends on context. And so we had what in another context in which I wrote a little bit about this, we had the development among these university presidents of what I would call contextually relevant discourse, which apparently means that one can say the most offensive things, at least in this context, including invitations to consider the viability and utility of the extermination of a particular group of people based on a characteristic, in this case, either their adherence to their religion or some genetic connection to religion, or however it is that one attaches membership, in this case, and it's been varied over the last 2,000 years, that one could invite people to consider that, which within a series of contexts which remain undefined, might not violate, while all personally abhorrent, might not violate at least the harassment and bullying rules at the universities. The discussion, of course, was much more contextually granular than what ultimately occurred. But what makes this interesting is that the nuance was lost in the gist of what everyone extracted, or what the media and pundits, including the White House and the good folks at Saturday Night Live, extracted from the testimony, which was that at least with respect to invitations to consider the genocide of Jews, there would be certain circumstances where one could understand that in either metaphorical, poetic, or some kind of way that would contribute to the sort of academic, full-throated discourse that people contemplate at these universities, which was actually, from a certain perspective, quite remarkable. The testimony, which of course was posted, the written text of their testimony was posted online by the three university presidents, and then it's been posted everywhere else. provided a much, much longer form of the discussion. But it then all blew up because almost immediately thereafter, significant donors, particularly at Harvard and Penn, were to express their displeasure and began campaigns to do two things. One is to cut their donations to these schools, and two, to begin lobbying for the removal of the presidents. Um, the first, I think, would be effective. The second merely cuts a symptom rather than the diseases. University presidents did nothing particular to themselves. They were, if you view them in their role, their fiduciary role as incarnations of the sensibilities of the university, doing no more than expressing what they believe to be the sense of the university community. So you can replace them all you want, and all you're going to get is a variation of the same thing if they remain true to this ethos. But anyway, they did that. One president has now resigned. I think it's the president of Penn, has resigned. There have been calls for the resignation of the president at Harvard. Both the Penn and Harvard presidents then came out with, those reality TV shows. They have those boxes, those glass enclosed places where you can do your personal truths and confessional spaces. They did variations of that, I think, either on Twitter or they put out their own statements. One of them, and I believe it was the president of Harvard, went on about her own personal truths as opposed to the institutional truths, which made very little sense on the one hand, and also suggested the irrelevance of what she was saying in terms of her apology, because it was a personal apology rather than one about the way in which she would act in her institutional capacity. So I have no idea what personal truth means here other than a confirmation of the fact that invitations to say things like genocide against the Jews could be contextually motivated within the truthness of the context. And the Penn president also sent out some notice apologizing for what, in retrospect, they both thought were either they weren't thinking or stuff happens and the like. We don't know
Yeah,
what's
so
going
they
to
did
happen.
some backpedaling afterward, but this is after backlash. I mean, the whole thing, I feel, was theater.
Well, right, but quite instructive theater. It was theater, but it was also theater of belief.
Well,
It
why are
seems
we
to
doing
me,
this now? Why did this happen now?
oh, because they were called to Congress.
And why
Uh,
were they called to Congress now?
they were called to Congress in the aftermath of some of the reported instances of, how shall we say, robust performances of speech on the campuses of these schools that effectively reminded Jewish students of the way in which they would react to majority peoples in other places and in other times, starting with Europe in the middle of the last century and then going back all the way to probably the first century of this era. And to
I
all of those, there was either indifference or after the fact discussion, or what was really interesting was the inability to detach the particulars of these actions from a this mania for contextualizing everything Jewish into a broader space. So throughout this testimony, it was never a Jewish problem. It was anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, or it was anti-Semitism and something else. It was anti-Semitism and something else. So it couldn't, it could never in these statements,
Well,
none of
because
this
that
stuff
is
stood alone.
extremely uncomfortable for uh quote intellectuals to think about themselves as anti-Semitic.
It's uncomfortable for academics to think of themselves as misogynists, to think of themselves as gender oppressors, to think of themselves in all
It
kinds of other
felt
ways.
like the whole time they were thinking about their image. that would.
Uh, you're being, well, that is certainly one way of looking at this, but in a sense, and in a broader sense, perhaps, what you're seeing, and you're right. What we're seeing is the exposure of the sensibilities of an elite intellectual class with deep ties to other functionally differentiated elites in industry, in policy circles, among functionaries in the State Department, which for a century had been notorious for this kind of thing. Apparently, but who knows how they're doing now? I'm sure they're doing fine. As these things are measured contextually. But what it does do is expose, it's not just, and that's really my point, it's not just them. And to think that you're either going to solve the problem, whatever this problem is, and it's difficult to define merely by getting rid of these three people, is I think misses the larger point that what you have here is a
My
well-entrenched set of cultural presumptions,
well, right. My point
academic
is,
cultural presumptions that are not going to go away
well,
merely because you can President Gay or President McGill or President Cornbluth.
yeah, my point is, I don't think the point was to solve the problem. The point was to blow it up. The point of these hearings was to blow up everybody's spot, basically.
Well, but you've blown up people spots you haven't blown up. And again, then it's
Well,
just, you're right. Then it's the politics of the personal. And ultimately, at the end of the day, we really don't care.
not necessarily just the personal. They were asking not about their personal lives. They were asking about the.
Yeah, but it's a person who's going to get canned. And then you think, well, okay, so now we got rid of McGill. Now we've solved the problem. Where what I'm saying is no, because McGill has got a clone in virtually everyone else who would be viewed as suitable to replace her in the presidency of Penn. So you haven't solved the problem. You're just playing musical chairs. And the next person is also going to have their own
Well, of
sets of these
course.
personal truths and this contextual speech stuff. I just love this stuff, this contextually relevant discourse
Well,
stuff.
yeah, but I mean,
And then we'll
that's what I'm saying. That
contextually
wasn't the
discourse
point.
themselves
That
to
wasn't the
wherever they
point of
want to
it
go.
in the beginning. It wasn't to solve anything. That wasn't the point of it. So
Well,
why are
that's
you
true.
looking for a solution?
But
I'm
on a side note, before I forget, and we'll come back to this, but we really should bring this up. There was a line of defense which lasted, I think, a nanosecond that suggested that all of this was really not about the Jews, because indeed the whole point of this is to make sure it is not about the Jews. It's about Judaism and Islamophobia, Judaism and prejudice on race, ethnic, or other grounds. It's Judaism, and there's no such thing as Judaism in this case, which is very weird, but not unremarkable given, like you said, absolutely right, the discomfort with this thing. But there was a moment, it looked like, where the defense was, oh, you're just beating up on women. And isn't this weird that, in fact, the only time you're going to beat up on university presidents is when you get
okay.
four
That makes
women,
me mad.
you get
That
four women together in a room full of, oh, wait, who was it who was going after them?
women.
Well, so which is why it lasted a nanosecond. So there was a bit of that, which of course then degenders, I guess, the Republican member from New York, who was leading this, as well as erase
Right.
from memory the leadership uh, in the House. But they tried, and again that gets back to, it's another variation of what we're seeing. And here again, we've got contextually relevant discourse that is contextually relevant. Performative discourse. Why
Mm-hmm.
is it that it was only women who were beaten up? Well, because these women happen to be good enough and outstanding enough to have been offered and to have taken their place, as they should have given their qualifications, in the presidency of these three institutions, which, as I understand it, are neither gendered male nor female nor anything in between, around, above, or below.
Yeah, they're all just trying to find these gotcha moments.
Right. But they're distractions, and they're the stronger the distraction, of course, the more nervous people are. You would think, the defenders anyway, about this. But there were other moments. If you read the statements, there are other moments of hilarity. And I won't name names, but among my favorites is proof of being nice to the Jews by making sure that the little group that they set up to be sensitive to anti-Semitism gets instructed by folks from Brandeis University, which is very telling. It's unclear to me why it is that one would have to go to Brandeis in order to be instructed. But
Yes, if
that
you're
again,
in
you're
a world
signaling.
at a
You're
world-class university, we don't know anything. We
well, that's right.
we
Without
don't know about we know everything,
but you're
but we don't know
signaling.
about Jews.
Right, but you're signaling again. This is the contextually based. If you get the imprimatur of the Jews, then it's okay. And of course, I believe that. And again, no names. One of the presidents was, in fact, we have an African American president. We have a Euro American president, and we have a Jewish American president, and who also testified and indeed did so. And there were hints of questions about the multiplicity of Jewish perceptions of Jew hatred, or of the notion of whether or to what extent. And we see this in other areas. This is very popular
Just
again
self-criticism.
among theorists. The notions of internalized self-hatred,
Hmm.
and that was popping up. So you've got all of this stuff swirling, the kind of stuff that you thought would have been, we would have finished having the conversations about and have moved beyond. But no, they're all back. All this stuff from the 40s and 50s, when having witnessed the horror of contextually, what shall I call it again? The horrors of contextually relevant performative discourse, that we would have moved into some other space, but apparently not. And indeed, around all of this is the expression of that within the character of some of the protests around the Israel-Hamas war, which is the elephant in the room that no one wanted to touch, and rightly so, because in fact, if you conflate the Israel-Hamas war with the manifestations of blanket notions, for example, and this is also making the rounds, that a Jew is by nature of their Judaism complicit in whatever is going on in the state of Israel, and then taking it out on them. There was the I think it was a falafel maker in Philadelphia. A bunch of protesters went, and there's some slogan, some 60s era rhymey slogan about them being tainted with the genocide by virtue of their identity, or the identity that's foisted on them. When you put all of this together, then the merry-go-round twirls around, and we're back to, oh, anti-Semitism. But then can you distill it, or can you dissipate it by situating it? And I'm using an academic term, by situating it within Judaism and Islamophobia, or Judaism and anti-immigrant bias, or Judaism and something else.
Well,
So you're
that
hyphenating anti-Semitism, which itself is hyphenated, is now doubly hyphenated, because you cannot, and certainly these presidents could not bring themselves to, you cannot talk about it without hyphenating it with something else. It's a cocktail that's too strong and needs to be
watered down a little bit. Hmm.
watered down a little bit, or as the president of Harvard and at Penn were at pains to say, that it needs to be contextualized within some larger discourse. Unless, of course, contextually, it's not suitable to do that in some other context and with respect to some other horror, in which case it's all cool.
I
So
I
all of
mean
this stuff.
it's I mean, that's the first time I've I've ever heard that there is a context for genocide.
No,
But
no, and well, no, this is not the first time I've heard there's a context for genocide. There's always a context for this. That's been the rule for quite a number of years. My favorite part of these speeches is if you read them carefully, they basically they can be reduced to a couple of sentences. Number one, we're horrified by people who are mean to other people. All right, that's fair.
fine,
Number two, we have traditionally tried to be very nice to our Jews. And we are very nice to our Jews because every once in a while we'll go visit Hillel, or we'll go send them off to the Jewish university for instruction, or we'll listen to the voices of Jews. So we're very nice to our Jews.
mhm,
And then the third thing is of course, we're horrified by all this. And so we're going to do what academics are famous for doing. We're going to set up we're going to set up a series of
consortium.
rules which we will apply in a contextually relevant way uh, through using our systems, which in this case are going to be particularly sensitive both to context and to process, as opposed to others where context and process are kind of presumed, but they're not presumed in this case. And that's it. And that's it. And of course, they're horrified, but I can't really tell you much more beyond that. These statements are saying. So and we're also going to put up some guards. And so Jewish brothers and sisters, don't worry. You can do what you want. Just, don't wear your skull caps or any Jewish insignia. Don't walk alone at night on the street. We'll have
Wait,
some
what?
security for you. No, I'm exaggerating, of course. But for example, Harvard talked about my personal favorite is enhancing counseling resources. So we have mental health, and I'm quoting, we have robust mental health and counseling resources. So assume you get beat up or you're somehow mistreated in a horrible way. Don't worry. We've got a therapist to deal with the aftermath. Religious community support, increased reporting mechanisms, so you can report your little heart out about all of these things. And then we'll have numbers, and numbers are wonderful because then we can add this to our digital monitoring systems, develop some algorithm either to fudge the numbers or work them, bake them in a way that then we can longitudinally show how we are overcoming, right? So we shall overcome this in some particular way through these reporting and digitalized mechanisms. Policies for on-campus events will make sure that events are sort of nice in a contextually relevant way. And of course the increased security. So that's coming out of Harvard, which is all very nice and by the book. Again, I'm not mocking them. This is standard operating procedure for a lot of these things, but it does a marvelous job. It does a marvelous job of doing everything but, and this was why the congressperson was just so effective. It did everything but answer the question.
Yeah.
Everything but answer the question in profoundly interesting ways, some of which were unfortunately interesting and some of which might have some basis in good faith and in a contextually relevant way of actually moving us forward. But for the moment, Ms.
I mean,
Stefanik, I'm
I
afraid, had the better
she had the
of
upper
this.
hand. Absolutely. But I understand how they wanted to stay true to free speech, the First Amendment, and boy, oh, howdy, did they.
Well, I mean, yes and no, since before the Second World War, and that was the SNL, the Saturday Night Live people actually knew their law of free speech better than the presidents of these universities when they slyly, I mean, it was really well done when they slyly threw in the question, well, does it violate your policy? In this case, it was, I think, harassment and bullying. Does it violate your policy to suggest that you might consider genocide against the Jews? And then they gave the contextual, well, we don't know. And then he said, but what about if you yell, if you say you're going to burn down a theater?
Hmm.
right? And there's a very famous extract of a constitutional case that said, yeah, you got free speech unless you yell fire in a crowded building. And the response, the SNL response, and I think it came out of the mouth of either the MIT or the character playing the Penn president, goes to say, well, I would just be delighted because it means that we're supporting the arts,
Oh
right?
yeah,
And
she said something. I would be delighted because there's light. There's a light to see all of the beautiful art.
right, and also that people are in the theater supporting the arts, right? And it was a very pointed way of suggesting just how
And that's
the presidents had to some large extent lost their way, and they lost their way in that very complicated house that they and their academic class, because again, it's not just them, they are merely factotums of a much larger forest of like-minded people. They're not unique. So I don't blame them.
I mean, they
They
even
are
said,
true to a class who honestly, and I will give them all of the benefits of any kind of space for the most good and positive and wonderful reasons, have built a complicated house, the contradictions and horrors of which I think this colloquy finally, if only for a moment, at least shed a little bit of light on. They're going to work very hard. There'll be some personal sacrifices, not sacrifices in belief, as these folks are not changing their beliefs. There will be changes of personnel, of bodies, but not changes of belief. And then the hope that with some apologies, and again, with these systems, you'll have your therapist, you'll have your priests, you'll have and I said that deliberately, you'll have your priests, you'll have your police people, and then all of this will eventually go away as the next crisis consumes
well,
the political
they'll
classes.
learn how to deal with it differently next time.
Right, but the problem will not go away. And of course, the Jewish question, always being a canary in a mine, is merely a warning with respect to all kinds of other areas that are already blowing up, right? The gender areas, the race areas, the ethnicity areas, the areas of migration. Those are also just waiting. The Jewish problem, of course, has been so well defined over 2,000 years that this one's almost on automatic. The others you have to work a little harder to get through, which is why it just made a lot of sense that if something was going to blow up in a contextually relevant way. Sorry, it's just
Yeah,
right now it's that button and I'm
you're
pressing it because
pressing
I
it.
keep getting
It's the
rewards.
big red
Um,
button.
right.
You can't help yourself.
I just can't help myself. That's where you go. Between that and seeking not an apology but an explanation. Um, they by expounding their own personal truths, right? You get exactly nowhere, because in a sense, what the congressional hearings was not about personal truths. As much as I love and respect all these people, I really could care less in their roles, their representative roles as presidents of these universities. I could care less what their personal views are. And indeed, I would be horrified if they run these things the way one would
According to their
expect a
personal views.
dictator, right?
Yes,
According
please
to, right,
don't.
they have a fiduciary obligation, a representative obligation. So what I do not want to hear, or what I find, although I love hearing this stuff, and I would be happy to have a
Yeah,
beer with them
bring us the tea.
about this, their personal truths are, for me, unless it's some horror, their personal truth is that they're a serial killer. Yeah, that's terrible. But their personal truth in this institutional context where we are at is of no relevance other than to the extent that it may be abhorrent. I'm sure they're not. So what I want to hear is their institution, their collective truth, the collective truth, which is their duty and responsibility to uphold in this context and in other contexts, not the anti-Semitism, but each in its own right, given its own
Yeah, but it seemed like they were really
space.
flustered articulating the
What, these people flustered? Oh, spare me. You've got university presidents at the top of their fields. These are global leaders, all of whom were prepped, if I understand correctly. They were not sitting at home talking to their best friends. Oh my goodness, oh my goodness, what am I going to say? As I understand it, not only did they have their staffs, and I would be shocked if they didn't compare notes before they all went in together. The
wow,
university
so they
presidents at
knew
the
that
elite
they were
level is a very small and clubby world, but I'm sure that they would have had to have hired all kinds of outside people to help prep them
all right
the
though.
way, for example, you traditionally prep for Supreme Court
Oh,
arguments, you prep for
absolutely. Do you
testimony and
think
the
they
like.
prepped for the question,
But
what
this
do you
would have
think
been the
about
most
genocide?
simple and direct question. This would have been the first one.
I
If
mean,
if they'd have
genocide's
paid me
bad,
the kind of
okay?
money they paid whoever it was that they paid, the first question out of my mouth would have been, so how are you going to answer the question? Do you condone?
Do you
Does your institution condone, or what is your institutional response
we
to
cool with it?
someone going and saying, hey, I think it's a great idea to genocide the Jews?
It's totes
Um,
fine.
let's work through that. And then to have the courage, especially given the amount of money that they're paying me, to have the courage to say, well, I don't think that saying, well, context makes a difference is going to get you very far in these things. So if it was someone who had absolutely no resources, no experience, no nothing, we have former deans of law schools, we've got presidents of who are now serving as president, you've got people at the very top, and you've got to respect them. They are there because they merit it in terms of their abilities. No one is taking that away from them, but that just augments the failure, the blindness, and worse than that, I think, the belief system, the collective belief systems that all of them gave mouth to
Ba-bam.
in the
They
form of their
knew.
written and then their written testimony and then in
You're right.
the
They
colloquy.
prepared for
So,
this. They were ready. Do you
so
think do you think that if it was a different population and they asked the same question about genocide, the same answers would
well,
come?
that would depend on context. Don't you think it would it would it would depend on context?
Their
And of
answer
course,
would definitely depend on context.
and this will be my last point. There's a lot of ideology hiding behind an innocuous word like context, right? You use context.
Absolutely.
Who knows what context means? Context really, in a lot of ways, is the way in which you signify or you give signification to the application of a series of presumptions and rationalizations. Context is the way in which you actually think about the Jews in this case without actually having to expose the
It's
way you
kind of
think about the Jews,
I
because what you're
really
talking about
would
is,
have
is
been
context.
tickled if somebody asked a follow-up question. Could you explain to me what you mean by context?
Well, right, and I would be surprised if they had the answer. Right. But again, it's the context here, one of inviting individuals to consider the value and positive qualities of engaging in the genocide of the Jews. That the context is a way of taking the sting out of that invitation and of rendering it merely an expression of something else. This weird journey really exposes, I think, the underlying presumptions with respect to the power of this speech, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the context where, in a sense, you can, in ways that you couldn't in other contexts, shrug your shoulders when someone says, well, let's consider the possibility of genociding the Jews. Heard that before. And so the context suggests, right, but this is horrible. If and then of course they would never phrase it that way, and they ought, and they would be, and then ought to be horrified if in fact that's what happens. But it's almost inevitable that's where this leads, and it's very hard to avoid this, and then to avoid the systematic thinking that got you there, which then also suggests that at some point this differentiation of horrors with respect to these identity categories is something that really, really, really needs a hard conversation, which no one is going to be having. And certainly gender folks, race folks, migrant folks ought to have a lot to say about this and ought to be quite nervous about the implications of this. But that's all I got. Woof, woof.
I
In
guess I'll stop
context.
there too, in context. Bark,
All right,
bark.
folks. Until next time.
All right, we'll catch you next time.
Bye.